All right, Caroline, we're live. Thanks for joining me this morning. I will give the floor to you. Why don't you introduce yourself to my audience? And then I think I kind of want to start the conversation around, the beginning of your career. And I'm always interested in why people choose the path that they do and why you chose the HR path. So maybe you can start with just an introduction and get into that a bit.
Thank you. And actually, it's good afternoon here in Scotland or in the UK, so you're up a lot
Oh,
earlier than
yeah.
normal.
Sorry. Yeah, it's early for me, but good call out.
Absolutely. Um, yes, I'm Caroline, and I've recently launched my new business, which is really supporting startups who are that kind of starting player stage to really get ready to prepare for their next like growth milestone and to scale their business. But if I wind back a bit, so I live here over in Scotland. But prior to joining my last startup I was with for 3 years, I actually was in multiple global roles. And so though I lived in Scotland, I have been in many different places. I was based in Switzerland for a while, and I'd traveled to Dubai in Mexico. And then when COVID hit, I came back home and starting out this house here in Scotland. And I'm a mum. I've got another half, and it's really helpful to mention that because I think that as you go through your choices and you go through your career and you're making your decisions around which path to go, I think as a woman, as a mum, actually I've been blessed by having another half that has taken way more than his share of the home and childcare to allow me to really go and what I would say is have adventures in the world of work. So my kind of first value on the list of things that's important to me in life is having a life adventure. And I very much brought that into my choices and what I've been doing. And I think even as I go back even further, when I was quite small, I was one of the shyest people on the planet. I would have said boot a goose. And through a number of the choices and decisions I made with work, actually I feel it's somehow gone way over the other end of the spectrum. Actually, um, I have a lot of things to say, a lot of things to contribute, and a strong desire to help others to reach their full potential. It's very much the ethos I've taken in every job. And I've been blessed in the various jobs that I've done to have some really strong mentors that I've really benefited from, and they're still really helping me in this stretch and do stay. So your question about like, how did it all begin? So I studied law to begin with, and I'm doing nothing to do with law just now, but I've got, say, look, my closest friends are all lawyers. And I couldn't get the kind of traineeship that I really wanted. And so I took this part-time job over the summer in a dry cleaning firm. And one of our regular customers was a lady that had her own recruiting business. And we got chatting, and she said, well, hey, why don't you come and join my team? And I think that most of my big career moves have been through what I would call accidental encounters with the right people at the right time. I think you have to be able to spot the opportunity. So I worked in that recruiting business. It was a really, really young team. We were all in our very early 20s. We were doing some great, great work with some fantastic Scottish businesses. And then actually I joined an American business who had multiple sites around the world, which was in electronics manufacturing, very kind of low levels of hierarchy, strong US culture, which gave me a really great grounding in working in a different kind of team. And then I spent 10 years in financial services, which sounds like a very long time and not such an exciting context, but actually during that time, I was lucky in that I had 6 different jobs and 8 different line leads. And that gave me huge opportunities. And what I found was that I was quite often asked to take on the stuff that just nobody else wanted to touch. The stuff that was difficult, complicated, people hadn't been able to get traction with. And that stood me in such great stead for future roles because I didn't have the fear of taking on something that was hugely challenging. And that's still in my bones today, like taking on this opportunity to have my own startup as a founder. And I find actually that was the way to really get traction in your career, was to put your hand up to say, yes, I'm sure the path. I can prove myself in this space. And then I had a really strong set of mentors and people that were really encouraging me to go that bit further. And what happened next was a series of roles in great organizations in retail and FMCG with Heineken, with also Philip Morris globally, where actually I didn't join those jobs on a permanent basis. I joined initially to go and help them out with a piece of work for a period of time. And then I ended up staying. And that's often been the kind of trajectory for me, is go on somewhere, do a great piece of work, actually, and then other doors open, and you have the opportunity to do some completely different things. So skills acquisition and writing off challenging pieces of work have been really important for me. And then during the pandemic, I came back to working out of the UK. And that was great because I felt I was doing something like for the Scottish economy. The work I was doing was going back into the lives and communities here in Scotland. And I was doing some contracting again. And I met Mike, who is the CEO of Snappy, which is a high growth e-commerce tech business. Last year was the second fastest growing business in Scotland. And I hadn't ever intended to join a startup. I spent so much time in these giant corporates, albeit often in these transformation type roles. And when I met Mike, I was really struck by what just seemed like a really compelling proposition to go and create something in the people and culture space completely from scratch. So I was always going in and inheriting other people's piece of work, and the social and community opportunity with Snappy was really, really huge in terms of the dent we were making to those local communities. And so, although I had never imagined myself in a startup, the choice seemed like the really, really obvious choice. And I was also extremely lucky. I think I touched on this when we spoke previously, that Skyscanner was one of Scotland's biggest unicorns. Many people use Skyscanner to book their holiday and book their hotels. And a couple of the team had come from Skyscanner and joined Snappy within our exec team. So I also had the opportunity not just to bring my experience of doing change and doing transformation, doing culture in these really big corporates, but actually also learning from a great founder, fabulous entrepreneur and his co-founder, but also working with some people who's been there, done it, and got the t-shirt in startup world. That was really incredible. And I was there for just under 2 years. So it's a bit of a long story, but there's some key thread there when I sat down and thought about it. They're about really not being afraid to try some new things and have an adventure in life as well as work.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a helpful background. I want to back up a bit because
Yeah.
I want to call out how you said that you're very shy when you started. Now you're confident and you were chief people officer at a top startup. Now you have your own company. Was that intentional of starting your career and saying, I want to grow and be a better person, or did it happen organically? I mean, what do you recommend to young people just starting out their career so they can follow a similar trajectory as you in terms of growth and success?
So I think, and it's often the case for girls, it's not to say it's not the case for men, but often with girls, there's an over index on doing academically well. So school, uni, I did really well academically. But that doesn't necessarily prepare you for the real world of work. And I think that my advice is, as it is to my mighty voice, as it would be to anyone else who's got a really academic and intellectual brain, is to start getting critical experiences in relationships, whether that could be what you're participating in voluntary work, where you're really developing those different kinds of relationships very quickly with peers, with people who are older to you, with people who are in communities that are maybe different to the one that you are in. And one of the things that I did find was there was very much that was intentional about it, to be honest. I was in my early 20s. I was really naive. I'd left home for the first time. And I made loads of mistakes. But I would say that I was tenacious. So when I was making mistakes or getting things wrong, I didn't let it get to me for very long. And what I did find was that as I got older, particularly as I got into my later 20s and early 30s, I really started to understand like what I would call and I would call their values. So the things that run through our DNA that inform our kind of day-to-day choices without us even really consciously thinking about it. So what was it that I stood for? And really started to get a deeper understanding of my strengths. I'd say it's taken me a longer journey to really understand my weak spots and where I really need to develop that. I think it's a continual journey through life. But I would say that that deep understanding of my strengths and my values was really that tipping point where actually the confidence really came from that. Once I knew who I was and I understood my strengths, actually I found my voice quite quickly. So things like being able to go first in a session where there's 10 people, a question is asked and nobody wants to say anything, to challenging up the way, to asking the difficult and uncomfortable questions. All of these things are really rooted in, I believe, having that kind of inner confidence and being prepared to take some risks. And like I say, for me, it's about having a bit of an adventure. What's the worst that can happen? Is a question I often ask of myself.
Yeah. And do you resonate with having patience at all? You say it may have taken you a while to realize what your strengths were. And I think a lot of people struggle with, or even sometimes I've struggled with, I want the results now. I want to be the chief people officer of the top startup now, but you need to realize that it takes years to get there. Looking back, does that resonate at all?
I don't think it does. I think that's a bit, learning as I look back the way. But at the time, I didn't feel particularly patient. But again, I was lucky that I didn't really do any one job for more than a couple of years. I would still be with an employer. So, for example, spending 10 years in financial services, or I was with Heineken for 3 years and I did 3 different roles in my time there because I was lucky to have the opportunity to take on some of the tough projects. So I think also the important thing is that understanding that opportunities aren't going to come and find you. You need to put yourself in a position where you can spot the opportunities and have people that will recommend you and talk for you when you're not there in the room. So I don't know that it was patience. I think I say I've been competitive more than I've been ambitious. So very competitive with myself, wanting to always do better than I did before. But also I do have a internal driver that can be a huge gift and a huge distraction at the same time, which is that fear of failure. And that drives you to overperform and outperform often your peers, but equally it can lead to less sleep, less rest, you burn out faster, you really take less time to stop and reflect on where you're heading and why you're heading there. So I definitely think sometimes when I work with people in the up and coming generations that there is this impatience to move up the ladder really fast. And I would say think more about how quickly you can acquire new skills and acquire new experiences as opposed to necessarily going vertical. The vertical will happen naturally if you're acquiring the right skills and acquiring the right behaviors as you go. And that's certainly been my experience and what I tend to recommend to people. Sometimes you can get hooked on the title. You can get hooked on the brand. And I've been focusing in on what you have to offer that's different to others. It's a better place to focus. That would be my advice.
And what are some examples of those skills that someone could focus on? Or if you want to maybe look at it from an HR lens, human resource people lens, the skills that you built in your career as you were progressing?
So there's one, as you asked that question, there was one that was so top of mind for me, I just didn't even need to think about it. And it's around the skill of handling conflict. Doesn't really matter what job you're in, at what level, in which industry, whether you're in a startup, scale up, or a big corporate. Your ability to be able to handle conflict within yourself and with others and with teams is a vital, vital skill. Because I have seen some people with incredible talent who can knock it out the park in terms of some of their technical capability. When it comes to actually having to deal with others, to leading teams, to leading people, or making things happen, that's often where things start to take a downward trajectory, or people's progression path starts to get more limited. And I say that because in today's world, a lot of the time we are on our phones and we're not always engaging in as much dialogue as we maybe did in the past. And particularly with challenging dialogue. And I do think it's a skill to be able to navigate. And there's a wonderful, wonderful book that's always recommended to people called Crucial Conversations. And I use it with all the teams I work with. I recommend it to everybody that I'm talking with is having and has a challenging relationship or is struggling to face into conflict, tend to lean out, although it's trying to lean gets angry quite quickly or gets emotional quite quickly in conversations. But ultimately, it's a practice of it. And I once had a great piece of advice from a coach who said to me, just treat everything as an experiment. And if you see it through the lens of an experiment, it will remove the fear of getting it wrong. Because as you do the experiment, you're experimenting to learn something. So you might feel like, okay, I've read something or I've seen something on LinkedIn or I've listened to a podcast and I now know what I need to do or what I need to try out. But actually, a lot of fearful of showing up and looking stupid or daft or getting it wrong. And I think that's another behavior in itself, which is to just get started, just try it out, view it as an experiment, and just learn through doing. But that skill of handling conflict is probably one of the most critical ones. It's also the, when I think of all the decades that I have spent now in the people culture inside of organizations, it's the one that causes the greatest distraction. And if you can remove that distraction, it's incredible what teams can then crack on and do.
What distraction? Sorry, so I'm understanding. If you
Yeah.
remove the distraction of having people and hiring and all that polished and taken care of, kind of frees up the business to focus on building and selling a great product. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
What I'm thinking more about is, and this isn't just startups, but it can often be startups. So there's a great piece of research that was done not that long ago of 21,000 startups across the globe. And what we found was that the startups that went on to be most successful, so to have the most successful exit, were the ones that had the most diverse founding teams. So what I mean by that is, well, what the study was looking at was diversity of their thinking style. So they thought differently to each other. And the tendency often with recruiting is that we tend to hire the people we feel most comfortable with or most connected to. And what that study is saying is that actually bring in a founding team of people who think differently, because then you will see things from different angles. And the big downside to that is when you're working closely with people who think differently to you, see the world through a different lens to you, who communicate differently to you, and perhaps have some different values to you, then that is a great mix of things that cause conflict, where people cannot get decisions made quickly because they're spending too much time disagreeing. They can't get to decisions. But also, emotions start to get in the way. When people get frustrated that stuff's not moving fast enough to make decisions, often it means those leaders, that filters through into their teams, and you can end up with these silos within businesses that makes collaboration way harder and teaming way harder than it needs to be. And so that everything slows down in the organization. Decisions, collaboration, and actually you can get to a place where actually everything starts to unravel that pace. And so the ability for teams at all levels, but particularly finding teams, to be able to take the best of having that diversity of thinking, so people that think differently, not to be able to have a healthy conflict. There's still going to be conflict. How do you make it healthy? How do you have the debate and the discussions that are challenging, but you don't all fall out in the process and you reach a decision point? And that's the thing, that if you can unlock that and you can make fast decisions, teams collaborate well, you can make changes at pace. That's often like one of the biggest barriers to growth, in my experience. If you take away things like external factors, like what your competition is doing, what's happening in your market, these are things that you can't control. But the dynamics of your top team, decision making, moving at pace, is stuff that is within your get and can be learned. Techniques can be learned to support that.
So, a couple questions on that. I think you're right. I think easier said than done, right? And I mean that's probably where you come in and can help. But my first question is how do you know that you're building a team with a diverse set of thinking? How do you confirm that, okay, yes, this person, my co-founder, thinks differently than me? Is it just an intuitive thing, or do you use cognitive tests to confirm it? What are your thoughts there?
In an ideal world, you would do some form of testing, but it very rarely happens because it often kind of gets in the way of good dialogue. And what I've tended to find is that that real understanding of who people are, what they're about, and what they stand for typically comes through spending time and developing relationships with people. So I would always be saying that, particularly, if you're the Tuber co-founder or you are starting to think about expanding your team, that you're having a series of conversations with people that doesn't just happen within the space of a week, that you're digging a bit deeper. So you're wanting to understand, so typically people tend to focus on the things that are easier to talk about, the tangible things. So understanding someone's skills, what they've done in previous jobs, maybe what some of the challenges were in those jobs. You need to get a lot deeper than that. You need to kind of understand and hand things that make someone tick, the kind of things they get under their skin, the kind of things that they get excited about, and some questions that you can ask, really try to get under the surface. And it's asking those questions around why, how, when did you find that more frustrating? How did you pull your team through that really challenging experience? So you kind of get more richness of how has that person handled the highs, how have they handled the lows? Asking questions like, what are the kinds of things that you get so excited getting out of bed in the morning that you just cannot wait to start your day? What are the things that actually, if you could avoid and had a way of getting out of it, you would avoid like the plague? So there's those questions that take you more into somebody's mindset, somebody's values, what they care about. And also asking people about their lives, because when people start to tell their story, it gives you these glimpses into who they are and what's important to them. And what I've noticed in all the organizations I've been in, that people typically spend too much time focusing on skills and experience and not enough time on mindset, alignment with values, how well that person really understands their strengths and how much they really understand what I would call like your dark traits. How you show up when you're not at your best, like when you're under pressure, when you're under stress, and how good are your tools in your tool bag to deal with that and getting back on track. So often when I'm involved in a hiring process, these are the kind of questions I'm typically asking, because often they're not being asked elsewhere in a hiring process, but they definitely make or break a hire for sure.
So I think you're right. I think again, it's difficult to do though, right? How can you tell that someone isn't just putting on a front about, saying, oh, I do really well under these dire circumstances at my last job when that really wasn't the case? How do you, and maybe again, it kind of comes back to just experience and intuition. How do you flesh out to say, okay, this is truly going to be the hire that makes the difference versus this is going to be a hire that tanks the company? I don't know. What's your experience with that? Those kinds of decisions, and it maybe really quick. It goes back to what you're saying. Everything is an experiment, but if you're hiring your fifth employee as a founder for a startup, I mean, it's a pretty high stakes experiment, right?
It's really high stakes. So there's a few things. One thing I always say is you can never eliminate a risk. It's always a risk. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to do things that will reduce it. And the kind of things that you can do are things like asking people for the examples. So I could go, I'm really great at handling concept, Connor. And you would go, great, tell me about that. Like, tell me in the last few weeks, well, give me an example of a conflict you've had to handle. Or, I simply saying, I'm great at negotiation. Well, just take me through it. Take me through your biggest example. Walk me through what happened. What did you do? What did others do? And what happened? I also think there's something about what are the questions that the candidate is asking. So often when we're hiring, we get so focused on what we want to know to mitigate our risk. But there's a 50%, if you flip it on the other side, it's as important for that person to decide if you are the right place for them. And making sure you've created that space for them to ask what they really want to know and encourage them to do it. Say, hey, what do you want to know? What have we not covered that might be the back of your mind that you've maybe held back asking about that you really want to know about what this experience is going to be like? And the questions they ask can be really helpful to understanding them more and what's important to them. And I would also say to have conversations in different contexts. So you might want to start off by having quite a free-flowing conversation that's just for 30 minutes as a first call. Let's do some introductions. You may then want to meet in person or do a deeper dive virtually and get them to meet others. So I'd always say avoid at all costs interviewing where it's just one-on-one. Like have another buddy either with you or meeting that person at another stage. We all have blind spots. We all have biases that we are not even necessarily aware of. And having another pair of eyes and ears and perspective to challenge the thinking really also helps to reduce that risk of hiring the wrong person. And the walkout. So as soon as you feel yourself gravitating towards thinking things like, oh, I see myself in this person. Oh, they remind me of when I was younger. And if these are all signs to go, well, hang on a second. Am I just seeing a mirror image of myself? And that's why I'm gravitating to that person. That's why they call it the halo effect. You know, when you think someone's better than they are because they remind you of yourself. So there's definitely some watch out. There's loads of great content online, you know, if you type in like top 10 most common hiring mistakes, there's a great list there of things that help you avoid the kind of most common errors. But those are some of the my key go-tos in terms of really trying to reduce the risk of making a wrong hire. And I think particularly in startups, it's a huge issue because the business is changing so fast. You know, what you needed 1 year is not the same as you might need the next year. And actually what you need 1 quarter might be not what you need the next quarter because things move so fast. So there's this particularly challenging dynamics in a startup context that really amplify the risks, I would say.
Can you speak to, I mentioned it in my previous question, just around those first few hires for a startup or a newly formed company? How important is that versus making your 100th hire? Do you have any sort of metrics or thoughts around that and how influential it is? And, you know, if you're hiring your 100th person, you could say, oh, okay, it didn't work out, but we can let that person go and fill somebody into that position. I mean, is that a fair statement, or is it always the same level of importance?
So there's a couple of things to this. One is that there's a phrase I keep coming back to, which is where do you need to be great versus where do you just need to be enough as a business? As you grow, so as you get to that size, 100, and that's a very relevant number because there's a thing called Delbar's law that you may have heard of, that when a business gets to size 100, it's almost impossible to get your arms round as a leader. You need to start pulling in additional support in a people team, etc. So I do think at that stage, you will have started to create some additional functions. You just need them to be good enough you don't need them to be great. If you're in a tech business, you need your developer hires to be great and knocking it out the park. So I think that understanding as a founder at all stages of your growth, asking yourself the question, where do I need to be great to win and scale? And where do I just need to be good enough? And at those early stages, when there's a really small number of people, the decision is very different to when you're at 100. And I would say the level of risk is the same in terms of being able to distinguish where you need to be great versus good enough. The additional dynamics when you're at the early stage is that you're going to need to be able to flex across everything. There won't be enough hands. So if you're hiring someone at that stage that only wants to stay in their lane, there's only one thing they love doing, and they're not willing to roll up their sleeves and step in, fill the gaps, here, there, and everywhere. It's probably not going to work. Because those really early hires, I call it, many people call it your T-shape. So you're looking for people that are skilled are shaped like a T. So you've got your deep T, which is the area that you're better than most. It's where you've got that depth. So for example, for me, when I was in the chief people officer role, it was my deep T was people and culture. The chief finance officer, their deep T was finance and controlling the money and the fundraise. But I think, having your broad T where you can lean into anything in that business is very relevant when you're building your first small team. That the people you're hiring have a really strong broad T at the top to be able to lean into anything, even the things that they're uncomfortable with doing or maybe don't have a rich skill set in. And I would say that as your business gets up or scaled up to 100, 200, etc., then your exec team at the top, that becomes very important as well. That who the founder has around and about them, that they have a deep team, but they can also come together with a collective leadership hat and join up as one effective team as they collaborate together. So I would say that it's not the point make isn't accurate. I just think it's different things depending on the context and depending where you need to be great versus where you need to be good enough. And the other piece is that you also hear debate around, should we be hiring for someone that's going to scale with us? So there's going to be maybe 5, 6, 7 years of growth that this person can make personally with their skills and their behaviors and their experiences. Or actually, do you just hire for someone that can do the job now? Get the job done now, and actually, if they happen to be able to grow as you scale, go with that person rather than someone that's overqualified. You're not really going to be using all of their skills for another few years. And again, I hear people talking very hard and fast rules. I don't think in this game there are hard and fast rules, but I do think that generally it's better to hire the right person for now and the next year to 18 months. Because your business, if it's a high growth business, will be moving, learning, growing at pace that you have no idea really the skills that you're truly going to need and what numbers and to what level of skill until you're much, much closer to that point in time. So therefore it makes more sense. Hire the people for now, but know and have in your mind as you do so, there will be a high proportion that won't come with you all the way on the journey. And that's normal. That's okay. That's typically what happens. Managing expectations as you're hiring people is really important, that they know the opportunity is there. But you've always got to be one step ahead. You've got to be, I think the phrase is growing as faster than the business is growing, particularly for a founder. You need to be one step ahead of the game. As your business is growing, you need to go faster. But that's the way I would say. It's a long-winded answer, but I think it's just because there's no more perfect answer to it.
Yeah, the way I'm thinking about it, or thinking about your responses, you need the now to get to the future in the first place, right? So
Yeah, that's a really
make
nice simple
sure
way
you
of doing
can.
it, Clement. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned something in there too, I want to ask you a question about, because I think for any manager, whether or founder, whether it's a startup or a company, you talk about, moving on from people that are no longer, I don't know if this is the best way to put it, no longer needed, or their skill set is no longer fitting where you're going with the company. And I'm sure you've had to do this quite a bit in your career. And I think it's kind
Yeah.
of a taboo topic until you've done it quite a few times. I mean, do you have any advice for managers out there that need to, for whatever reason, move on from someone, let someone go? How can people handle that? And again, going back to what we talked about earlier, definitely a form of conflict, but an inevitable conflict when running a business. So
Yeah, so I have advice for managers, but I also have advice for colleagues when they're moving on too. So the advice for managers is typically, it's not always the case, managers are not getting regular feedback. So when it comes to the point of having the difficult conversation, it can end up being like a surprise. And the person's like, hey, what do you mean? I thought we were all good. And you're then going into that conversation where it's just never going to end well. So I would kind of say that for a manager, you need to avoid the surprise. You need to be getting regular feedback. So someone is not scaling with a business, you need to be having conversations with them about that beforehand, which gives them the opportunity without open feedback. Like if they're finding it, and typically if you get to that point, that individual themselves is starting to feel uncomfortable. They're starting to feel like they're not quite keeping up, that they're not quite hitting the mark. And I think the right thing to do is to be having regular conversations about what's going well, but also what's not going well. I would also say that typically managers wait too long to have, once they know they need to make the decision, they wait too long to have it because they want to avoid it. You just need to rip the band-aid off and get it done and face into it, because the longer you leave it, the harder it's going to be to do it, and the more you will overthink it. And I would also say that most organizations have a set of values that, we go out into the market and say, our values are treating our people great, and our values about, this and that, and the next thing. I think what's very important is that the people that work in your teams look to what happens in action, not to the words and the values, as to whether they trust your organization or they don't. And I think it's important at those moments, not just when you're hiring people in, but when you're letting people go, and you do it with the values in action. What I think can work very, very well is when you're exiting people with compassion. And it's entirely possible to do that. You can still demonstrate that you care. You can still demonstrate respect for the individual. You can still be helpful to them. So it's not a case that they've been, it's a different set of circumstances if there's been misconduct, if there's been a significant behavioral issue. But if it's just the case that you need people with a stronger skill set, and actually, offering to connect them to others, offering to kind of write them a reference. There's a number of different things you can do to make sure that you're ending that relationship in the right kind of way. And there's tools out there now, there's things like, over here we have Glassdoor. I'm not sure that necessarily is the same over in the US. We probably have an equivalent. Where people go on and you go in, and most people who are searching for a job these days, one of the first places that will go and look is, what do the people who have left say about the organization? And if you're a small business,
yeah.
particularly if you're a startup and you're scaling, You only need a few bad reviews for your Glassdoor rating to change. And so therefore, I think a business should not take it lightly. How you exit people should be a priority, because otherwise it could hurt you in terms of who you're trying to hire. But on the flip of that, I would say my advice to colleagues that find themselves in that situation is to be very mindful that how you leave an organization is as important as how you join. Because the world is smaller than we think. Particularly if you were joining another startup business, there's a high chance that your new employer would want to connect with your former employer and you know someone in that business. And if you've had a really bad exit because you've shown to handle your emotions, rightly or wrongly, you could end up, I guess the phrase would be, cutting your nose off to spite your face. I think it's really important that how you leave is important as how you die. I think if the colleague and their manager are having good conversations throughout, you can really limit the negative impact of that. But as I say, exiting with compassion is entirely possible, and is I would always be standing as a route for that.
Yeah, I think a lot of good points there, and I want to pivot a bit. And this is probably a pretty in-depth topic, but I know you said it was part of the deeper part of your T, and I believe it's something that you help companies with currently through Upscale. So I want to talk culture and how a company builds culture and sustains culture, and maybe we can start with it from the view of a founder. If you're the founder of a company, are you sitting down and saying, I want my culture to be XYZ? Again, does it happen organically, kind of through your personality traits and your values that you already instill, or you've been building through a lifetime of experiences? How does a company culture develop, and how important is it to scaling and being successful?
My belief is that it is an enormous opportunity and at the same time an enormous risk. So there's high risk, high rewards when it comes to culture in terms of getting it right and getting it wrong. And I mean, what I've seen work is culture evolve over a period of time and then crystallize. And I can explain what I mean by that. But I also don't think there's one perfect way to do it either. It's just that the examples that I have seen and come across have typically been where there's been some kind of evolution, and it's gotten to the point where the organization has gotten to a certain size where actually, and that size is probably when you're getting upward of 40, 50 people, where you need to start formalizing how you define your culture and what it means to work. Your Pacific hasn't worked till you hire, you just can't get your arms around, like I mentioned earlier, that around Dunbar's law. When you get to over 100 people, it can very quickly turn to chaos. And actually, you got 100 people and 100 different ways of doing in the organization. So for a founder starting out, my advice would be to build a strong awareness of who you are. That's possible. So we'd be to use them like assess that there's tons out there in the market that are free. You don't need to look very far, do Google search to find something. And at the same time, I would be asking others you've worked with, I would be asking friends and family, things like, how would you describe me? When do you see me at my best? When do you see me at my worst? And thinking about, why are you doing this? Why are you setting up this business? What is your belief about literally driving this business? Because I think if you have that real understanding of self, you are in more control around how you shape the culture and values as you start to grow the business. And what I mean by that is, I can give a couple of examples. And in fact, I was running an event last week for female founders on this very topic. And when you have that level of awareness, there's a couple of things that you can do. You can start to make sure that you're weaving through your own values and your beliefs and how you see the world into how you tell the story of the vision for the business. You can shape it through the approach to strategy that you take, and you can shape it through the values. And what that means is that when you know yourself and that DNA is woven like, I think they call it like a golden thread, woven like a golden thread through the vision, through the purpose, through the values and the strategy, it means that as the business gets bigger, you onboard more people in, but you also, as part of that onboarding and the hiring, really help them understand the vision, the purpose, and the values. Your DNA is threaded through. You don't need to be in every room. You don't need to be in every decision, because the values should be hard at work, making sure you've got your people aligned in the same direction. Now, that is easier said than done. And quite a lot of the work I do is working with that founder to help navigate them through that period of time and to help sound the language and get the input from other colleagues to help refine it and shape it. It doesn't have to be all the founder's work. So that's one way of really getting your DNA into the organization. And the other way in which your self-awareness becomes so critical is in that piece we talked about earlier, knowing who you should put behind you in your top team. Whether that's co-founders or that's others that are coming in when the business is still small. And what I would say there is the more you understand who you are, the more you can avoid hiring purely in your own likeness. So you're then looking for people that are going to bring something different to what you bring. So you've got that more kind of diverse thinking in your team. And so those are two really important ways that you can help to frame your culture. But when I was with Snappy, when I joined the project, because when I joined, we were kind of nudging from 30 up to 60 people. And I would say the founder had a set of like mantras. So they weren't values, they were kind of like mantras. So things like speed-based perfection most of the time. So it's not a value as such, but it gave me big clues with those mantras as to, tell me, Mike, when you came up with that, when that resonates with you, what is it really about? Why does that matter to you? What is it about you that really resonates with? To then help shape what that culture and values really looks like. The other piece I haven't mentioned, and I do think it's very important, that regardless of your founder identity and spreading that through your culture and values, there are certain things that you would always want to have in a startup culture, regardless of your founder. And they are things like being able to move fast, being able to learn fast, to have a mindset of experimenting, to have a mindset of growing yourself personally, not just growing the business, to have a culture of collaborating across teams, culture of facing and leaning into the barriers. So I think there are certain things that are dynamics of culture that you really want to be seeing in every startup, although it may be described in a different way. And it should always have those elements of unique identity that go back to that founder's DNA. What you don't want is something that sounds like everybody else and is really bland and vanilla. Like, we care about people retracker teams. These are things that should all be taken as a given. So you're looking for the things that really define what you stand for and what you care about.
So I want to go back to your first point of the founder, the business owner, understanding themselves, their values, their vision for the company, and then kind of instilling that or doing that exercise and putting it to paper and then coming up with culture out of that. And in your experience, are most founders and business owners doing that exercise? Just curious. And then if they are not, what are the consequences of not doing it? What typically happens if you don't have a crystallized vision of where you're going and why you're going and what values are driving you?
I think what you do is you're leaving success to luck. Right? And I don't think anyone who's working the hours that founders are typically working wants to leave their success to luck and hit and miss a product market fit and being able to just drag stuff over the line. So from that perspective, I would say that by not doing it, there's a huge risk that you create unnecessary chaos in your organization. Because you need a vision for people to make informed day-to-day decisions about what they should be focusing on. A vision drives people in a direction towards their North Star. It also means that without that clarity of what the organization really stands for, what your customer experience is going to look like, it's going to look like something that's inconsistent, that misses the mark in terms of like what it is that you want to stand for with your customer. Because culture shouldn't just be something that's into culture should flow through into the vision connects what happens with your customers, your key stakeholders, your colleagues, your investors. All of that should be bound together through those values and culture. So it's not just your internal people it will impact. It will have a wider impact beyond that. I think it's like most things in lives, when things don't have focus, they can end up going off in 100 different directions. And when you get to that size, when you get to that size of 100, trying to get it back on the right track is very challenging. It's totally doable. You can do it. It requires a lot of energy and a lot of thought and a lot of time from your top line and your leaders to then get values and culture to a great place when you haven't paid it any attention. So I would say, start thinking about it from the beginning. You do not need to have a beautiful set of looking values. It can be scrappy, right? It can be, here's where I've got to for now, and that's good enough. This is how much I've figured out now. And continue to talk about it. Continue to revisit it, continue having conversations so that it evolves over time. And as you're bringing more people into the business, so one of the things I find quite helpful is every time you're bringing people in, stop for a second and go, what do we need to update in our onboarding content to refresh on vision, culture? Well, you shouldn't really be changing your vision too often, but to refresh upon your culture and values and to describe what it means to work here, because that's a really helpful trigger point to stop and go, okay, how have things moved on? What can we add into this? So it doesn't just become a big program or a big piece of work, it just naturally evolves.
Got it. And I want to kind of pick your brain, just considering your background and experience, and now you're starting upscale. And so I'm sure you put a lot of thought into this in terms of the vision you have for your startup, the culture that you want to build, and the values that are driving you. So I'm curious if you'd be willing to share that right now as you build your own company.
And I did take my own medicine on this. So I have done this work. I did my own work around deep work around values and my purpose around about 4 years ago. And then I came back and did it again about 6 months ago as I was thinking and planning about starting my own business. And for me, my purpose is very simply about making people's lives better so they can reach their full potential by helping to remove some of the barriers that are getting in the way. And so how that plays out with upskill, the part I play in helping to grow, scale, and be the absolute greatest they can be by removing what I would call the human barriers to really growing, scaling, and winning in that space. And I say that because in my experience, 9 out of 10 growth issues, when you dig underneath, they're actually human issues. And so my values, the way they show up is, it's such an interesting question. So I've got a tagline for upscale that says grit, grace, growth. And that's not just about some of the principles that I apply in the work that I do, it also is the 3 pillars of my values. So grit for me is about some of the stuff I touched on earlier. Your voice being heard, showing up and asking the difficult questions, which is very relevant when you're working with founders because you're often asking the curious and difficult and challenging questions. So coming with that kind of what I would call almost that harder performance edge, which is very much needed. In this, where you can't just be all soft and stuff, but you need to come with that edge, which is about how are you going to drive and help this business get into a kind of growth and performance space. The grace bit is about at the same time, you can't just do all grit because that's it. That's a horrible person to work with, and it would be a horrible organization to do and die. No, if it's something that hard edge. So grace is about the balance to that. And that's about showing up with a compassion and care. Being prepared to go first and be vulnerable so that others follow. It's about understanding that humans make mistakes. And that's a very normal part of being human. And just understanding a lot of those human dynamics. So within an organization or working with a founder, how grace shows up is alongside driving that hard edge of performance, how are you building a sense of belonging? How are you building belief in the decision? So that through those highs and lows, that roller coaster of startup life, you're really shaping the people like you. And also at the same time, you don't want an organization that's all grace and no grit. That doesn't work either. Nothing is done. Performance is not something that's a focus, and therefore the business doesn't work. So for me, and for the way I approach my business and the work I do, it's about bringing the grit, bringing the grace, and bringing the growth. And the growth for me is that continuous learning. Like I was listening to someone today, is this morning, on another podcast, and they were saying that they're such a geek because they're constantly listening to podcasts. And definitely, I'm always looking to learn. I don't ever feel like I have all the answers. So I'm never working with a client and going, I have it all figured out. I can tell you exactly what to do and it will work. That isn't the case. Sometimes it's about figuring stuff out together and really putting that effort into the job is never done. We're always a work in progress. No one's ever perfect. What's the work that you are going to do? The responsibility you take to continue with your self-improvement. So great waste growth is very much how my own values show up with that bigger purpose of really helping businesses become the vision that founder has in the real world. And it's no small feat. But I think if you can really get to grips with the people and culture side, so many other things start to unlock themselves.
Yeah, I think we've kind of brought it full circle, and I love how your value, there's diversity in your values, and you kind of talked about that in hiring. diversity of thinking styles and personalities. So I like it. I like how it's kind of all tied together. And so I appreciate you taking the time to be on, and I'll give you the floor to close if you want to add any final thoughts. So obviously you help startups with people problems, but maybe if you can clarify if there are specific sizes or types of businesses that you focus on, and where people can find you if they want to, reach out and learn more.
Sure. So typically, I mean, it's not exclusively. I do have clients at either end of the spectrum, but typically the spot that I love, and I particularly love being involved in, is where the business is maybe getting to around about 50 to 60 people plus. And they're thinking about, here, we're on the trajectory to get to 100. And it's me helping them avoid some of the most common pitfalls that are entirely avoidable. And then when you get beyond the 100, how do you really shape your organization to be nimble and scalable so you can actually work data? That's another big trick. That's really challenging to do if you're founder, you haven't done that before. So that's typically the kind of size of the business. It's often kind of post-seed heading to Series A, Series B and beyond. And then how people find me. So I am upscale.co.uk. And actually upscale is up-scale.co.uk. And you can find me as Caroline MacGregor on LinkedIn. That's not up together. A great way of finding me. And I think the one other thing I would add, Connor, is that there's a question that goes round in my mind in terms of can strongly help businesses and help the economies to flourish, which is that there's such a tiny, tiny percentage of successful female founders and tiny percentage of female founders that get funding. That's huge. They may get funding at seed stage, but find it very challenging to get funding at Series A. And so I have a question in my mind around why is that really? I mean, there's been lots written about it. I don't fully understand it yet myself. And I'd like to be part of helping figure that out. And I think also another thing is around AI and how AI will be able to help founders in the future to short circuit some of these challenges and to be able to help with ideation. I think that's another fascinating angle that I'm going to be exploring in the work that I do as well. So I think even for me, there's more to explore and more in terms of how I can support. But I've loved the conversation today. I've loved the fact that I didn't know the questions you were going to ask me. So thank you so much, Connor. And I really enjoyed it. And great opportunity to spend some time with you today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. I enjoyed it as well, and that's why I love these conversations. I get to learn as well. You say you're a constant learner, and me as well. So again, thank you for taking the time. All your contact information, LinkedIn website will be linked in the description. So thanks again, and best of luck.